Excellent. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Could you say your name and what you are doing with Remission Biome?
I'm Lisa Bailey, and I heard about the Remission Biome Project on Twitter, and I got long COVID 3 years ago in March of 2020. So I've been sick since then and trying to find something that would help.
Wow. So March of 2020, getting long COVID. So you were part of the first really early wave of COVID and also long COVID then. What was that like
Yeah.
for you?
It was pretty awful. I didn't get a test at the ER when I went in because tests were so rationed back then. I didn't have a traditional course of the illness. I didn't have any lung involvement. So when I showed up at the ER, I looked like I might have had something else. And we had a known exposure. So, but even that wasn't enough to convince the ER staff to give me a test because I didn't have a fever and I didn't have pneumonia. So, but
Wow.
I showed up there with tachycardia, and diarrhea, and vomiting, and like runaway tachycardia. So, but that not having a test proved to be really a bad thing. Like my insurance company wouldn't let me go to a long COVID clinic because of that. They told me my doctor could prove I'd had long COVID. And it was hard for me mentally to have everybody like questioning me, like since my main symptom was cardiac. A lot of people are like, oh, you just have anxiety, you must be
Yeah.
panicking because it's the pandemic. And it was so new and scary to everybody. And um, so yeah, that was really tough. And I tried to work that whole first year on a reduced schedule. I was a professor, an English professor. And so I was working from home because we were all in lockdown. But even just learning the software to teach online and trying to keep track of everything with the brain fog I started having panic attacks whenever I'd sit down at my computer to work. And I decided after about a year I couldn't do it anymore. And that was a really big blow to me too, to lose your career like that and just to have to leave, like without any. And I was an adjunct professor too, so it's kind of like working on a contract basis. So I didn't like have a tenured position where I knew a lot of people on campus or anything. It was just sort of like a cutoff. And that's been a difficult problem for us financially. Um, my husband actually ended up taking a leave of his work to try to help take care of me because not that I'm like not considered severe, I don't think, but just all the doctor's appointments and everything that I was trying to manage were insane. And I was getting a lot of gaslighting and pushback from doctors, like your tests are all normal. It wasn't until after a year I had been sick when I finally had a blood test where somebody got excited about the results. And I went to an allergist because I had diarrhea every day for the whole first year I was sick, and I thought it must be wheat or something.
Right.
I mean, I knew I had long COVID by then, but I couldn't understand the diarrhea. And when they ran the blood work on me, it was a lymphocyte subset panel, and I had no CD19, which is a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
That's what happens in active HIV. And so my immunologist got pretty excited and ran a bunch more tests, but that was the first validation I'd had in a year that something was really, really wrong with me. And I remember standing there with a piece of paper in my hand. I didn't even know what CD19 was, and saying, I'm sick. I'm actually really sick,
Yeah.
and crying after all of that. So and it's been really strange. Your health problems when you have issues like this come and go in waves, and so it's very confusing to you and your doctors. um, I also wound up, after about a year of being sick, I noticed that I was getting strange tissue on my arms and legs. Like it was stiff and numb, and it was studded with these tiny bumps. And I tried to get my doctor to do something about it. And finally, I started Googling myself and diagnosed myself basically with something called Derkham's disease. And I have met one other person who was triggered into Derkham's after getting COVID, but it's a really rare disorder, and we actually had to travel out of state to see the national expert in it, which is just something I've never done personally, to go see a doctor in another state,
Yeah.
and very expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, that's partly why my husband had to take time off of work, is because we were in the middle of this and it's been a huge fight with our insurance company. And I'm still fighting for care. And Remission Biome is really the first thing that's given me hope in 3 years, 3.5 years now.
Yeah.
So it was, that was really, it's been a journey.
I would imagine. I think that that validation piece, when you get that piece of paper, that lab result back that says, hey, actually, this is real. What you've been experiencing is not a fabrication of your mind. This isn't some bizarre fluke.
Well, and a lot of people are never going to get that test who
Right.
have long COVID. And that's something that just blows my mind is that, I really had to push for these.
Mhm.
And I know how pushy I am. I'm a former journalist too. I was just like, so I was really, um, it took a lot.
Well, we've had such a narrow um, view of what COVID is, both in terms of the acute condition and also what comes after the fact, that when people like you present with symptoms that are far beyond the confines of purely pulmonary experiences, we tend to kind of throw up our arms and it's confusing.
Mhm.
I think now that this has been in the news more, it's becoming a little bit more understood better. But especially back when you were getting sick, there was no widespread understanding or acknowledgement that symptoms from long COVID could go beyond shortness of breath and other respiratory
Right.
things.
Yeah, I got sick before the New York Times story even came out about how cardiologists in New York were like, something's going on here. Everybody's coming up with these bizarre readings. So, yeah, I think if I showed up now with those symptoms and said I had a direct exposure, they'd believe me. But
Right.
back then they didn't.
Yeah. What was it like to go that long without having any kind of serious?
I think even my husband started to think that I was a little off in the head. So that was a really big deal for me. I didn't forget that lesson either because I've it's helped me like have more confidence when I really think something is wrong to go to a doctor and say, you need to run some tests on me and you need to keep running them until we figure out what's going on here. But that's, I've actually had to bring lists of tests to my doctor and say, please test me for these things because he didn't know what to test me for. And it's like, oh, I heard online somebody, our angiotensin renin system is affected. And can you please test that? You know, and my GP never diagnosed me with long COVID. I had to private pay a rheumatologist to get that diagnosis. And the Durkheim's thing, a lot of doctors won't even see me in Central Washington for that problem. And it's been really hard to like know as a patient like how this is all wrapped up together. Like is the Durkheim's part of long COVID? Is that a completely separate thing?
Mhm.
I was having some health issues before I got sick. Was that something that, I had IBS before I got sick? Was that part of it? And just the merry-go-round of questions in our heads as patients can really drive you crazy too. It's not just people not believing me. It's like, I don't even know what's wrong, and I've been
Absolutely.
thinking a lot about this. So, and do a lot of reading.
Mhm.
But yeah, that was really hard on me.
Yeah, because in addition to the just baseline symptoms that you experience, brain fog, fatigue, insomnia, in your case, a lot of gastrointestinal distress, as well as all these cardiac issues, you also have to then, on top of that, deal with the fact that you are now the expert of your condition and you have to advocate for yourself, make all your appointments, search out all the experts, and find any route of treatment because none of that is handed to you.
No, no, and like I said, I know how pushy I am, and I think a lot about people that don't have, my husband's an attorney.
Mhm.
I was a journalist. We know how to get stuff done like this. We know how to fight with an insurance company, but it's just, there seems to be a real push for like kind of psychologicalizing long COVID and treating people that have this problem as it's a somatic problem. It's not really a physical one.
Mhm.
And I fighting against that as one of the longest long haulers, for the last 3 years has been hard. So people who got sick in 2020, I think we have like a different kind of burden than a lot of people. And I still run into people like, well, did you get the vaccine? That must be why you're sick. It's like, I
Yeah.
got sick before the vaccine. So,
So you've mentioned a couple times your background as a journalist, you were working as an adjunct professor. Tell me a little bit more about what life was like for you before March
it
2020.
was really busy. I took care of everything around my house and yard. And I was teaching 2 classes and sometimes working at the newspaper here in town. So and I freelanced also. So there were always projects going on, always a lot of stuff, always a lot of things to keep track of mentally. And You know, when you're a professor, your stock in trade is your short-term memory. You have to remember all the student names, you have to remember personalities, you have to, you know, and I just couldn't do that anymore after I got sick. And like I said, it was having panic attacks because even dates, like trying to get dates straight, and I'd double check my work 3 times, 4 times, and then I would still screw stuff up, and I would be in tears over it. I would be in the car trying to drive my stepson somewhere, and I would forget where we were going. And I would take me, like my heart would be in my throat before I could pull that up. All that was, you know, I was so used to having a fantastic memory and being able to do all this stuff without even thinking about it. It was really a reality check to get sick and realize how much I was doing. And I think everybody who gets chronically ill has that, hits that wall. But you know, I used to run a newspaper. You know, I did a lot of different stuff and always had a lot of energy and enthusiasm for it. So I feel like COVID totally changed my personality.
What is your day-to-day like now after 3.5 years of
I
this?
can get out once or twice a day for like mild errands, but that's it. And I have a lot of trouble sleeping. You know, I'm fairly busy doing all the remission biome stuff. I'm trying to get myself into the habit of taking all these things and doing it, like the splenic ultrasound and all that stuff. But it's a lot of writing letters to doctors still, trying to get care, trying to, you know, I always have like cats that I'm herding for my different like appointments and stuff. I'm in physical therapy because my spine is imploding on me. I live with a lot of pain and fatigue.
What's
So
that pain and fatigue like? I think a lot of times people struggle to understand what that really feels like.
yeah, I get nauseated to the point of vomiting 2 to 3 times a day. I have medication I take for that prevents the vomiting now, but that makes it really hard for me to go out and do anything when my system is that unpredictable. I still have a lot of trouble with my digestive system and needing to go to the bathroom like immediately. Sometimes I'll get these like attacks of diarrhea. And it has made me, I don't even know how to pronounce this word, misanthropic. Like I don't want to be around people anymore because my system is so, I don't know what it's going to do in the next 5 minutes. And I've become really isolated because of it. But yeah, it's affected my whole life. I mean, everything from my relationships with my family. You know, I have family members that don't believe that long COVID is really a thing, or they think I'm kind of exaggerating. But it's the fatigue is, I'm trying to describe the fatigue. I mean, it's really difficult for everybody. Knows what it's like to get sick, I think, and feel really, really lousy. But people have a really hard time understanding what feeling that lousy would be like 24/7 for like for months and months of time. I mean, it took me over 2 years to get used to waking up in the morning and I'm like, oh, what's wrong with my body? That would be like the first thought, like, what happened last night? You know, like I'm hungover or something's really wrong. It took 2 years to get used to that. You see her, she's playing with my strings, trying to get my attention. But yeah, it was really bad, and it's has been really bad. It's been a lot of there's been a lot of mental adjustment that's had to be made on my behalf because of that.
Yeah, there's really no part of your life that this hasn't touched.
Right. It's you know, even my relationship with my pets has changed. There's a lot of stuff that I can't do for them anymore, and that's just the way it is. So, but yeah, it's the trying to get used to becoming from a busy person to like a disabled person in this short a span of time has been it's been a real issue for me.
Yeah, that was a very quick progression from active full-time working and being
I
involved
think
into
that a
your
lot of people
community.
say that. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about how you discovered Remission Biome and decided to apply.
I started looking all over social media for answers to my problems about like summer of 2020, when I realized it wasn't getting better. And I can't remember exactly when I ran into Tess online, but I was reading her tweets and stuff before she started talking about remission biome. And I got really excited about it when I first heard about it, because it made a lot of sense to me. It's a lot of the things that I have been thinking about and trying to do in my own life, about trying to heal my digestive system. And I was actually shocked about it. Well, I'm taking that already, and I'm taking that already, and I'm taking that already. I think they're onto something. But the idea of like patients kind of taking control of their own health and doing something without having to rely on the medical community was also very exciting to me. As disgusted as I have become with the medical community, it's probably not a very PR kosher thing to say, but I have been to something like 22 doctors in the past 3 years. We added it up. And some doctors just did absolutely nothing. Like, they didn't run any tests. They didn't prescribe anything. They didn't have any advice. And, you know, that was a really hard thing to accept. So I think it's really cool that people are kind of taking it into their own hands, and that we as a group, we have enough power to kind of, there's a peer pressure on my GP, I guess, like, it was like, well, there are 50 of us in this, and there are 2 PhDs leading it. And, it's not just some sort of thing that people are just doing it themselves. It's an organized thing that's like a program. And I've been excited about hearing other people talk about how they've been able to get their doctors on board. And I think mine is too. So.
Yeah, there's some legitimacy behind these efforts because of the strength of this community, and also the research that's gone into developing this whole process.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, that's really exciting to me. And it's exciting to be a part of that. And, even though I feel like I'm a new sick person or a newbie at it, even after 3 years, there's been people, I mean, like Tess and Tamara have been sick way longer than I have been. And I have learned a lot from the ME community, and I've been diagnosed with MECFS along with long COVID. So, and like I said, I don't know if one of those are, sometimes I think of those one of the same anymore, but there's a controversy about that too. But yeah, I don't think people have any inkling what it's like to have something like this, and to be looking at this for the rest of your days. Like that's it. And that's what the medical community has been telling me. Like, there's nowhere else for you to go for help here. We can't help you with your immune system problems and stuff. So
there's essentially no end in sight, and the energy that you once dedicated to a journalism career and to teaching students has now been channeled into managing the day-to-day of something that nobody understands.
Yeah. Yeah, and I like I said, I've been really pushy about it, and I think I've gotten a lot of information. But I'm just one person, and I'm not a doctor. I was an English major. It's like trying to learn about biology and genetics and all that stuff. I actually had my genes done as part of this too. I had my whole genome tested. And I have some mutations, but they're ones that nobody else has had before. So they're of unknown significance, or whatever they call them. And so my insurance company refuses to recognize them. But that's another expense that we've had to do along the way. I mean, we've spent thousands and thousands of dollars trying to find answers for me. And that's what's happened.
Yeah. What are you, I'm gonna have to edit this out because I'm rambling. Sorry. Actually, no, we're going to keep that in because I also am sick and I have brain fog. And so that means that when I'm having conversations with people, as much as this is my life and this has been my life for the past 15 years, I still have moments where I'm at a loss for words because I hear the story of somebody else going through this. And it's just heart-wrenching to know that it's not just me, it's widespread. And it's so, so unfortunate that this is the reality for so many people in the medical community.
Yeah, it's hard for me not to get emotional about it. It's tough. So.
I'm sorry you're going through this, and I'm also heartened to see that the remission biome community has brought people like you together with researchers, people who do have the capacity to use their science background and their research expertise to delve into all the literature around this and come up with connections that people have missed previously.
Exactly. Yeah.
What's it like being part of this community and knowing that you are one of the pioneers in addressing some of these longstanding complex chronic illnesses?
I think that I've been in a lot of leadership roles in my life as a newspaper publisher and a professor, and that's what is important to me to keep doing. You know, I've always wanted to help other people somehow, and maybe that's not a leadership role, but it's just being brave enough to like be like, I'm going to do this thing, whether it works or not. I'm going to still try. Um, and I think that's really important when you have a chronic illness to still keep trying. And because if we all know what not trying is, you know, it's giving up. And we lose a lot of people because people can't, I mean, like the permanence of this is very, like you said, it's very heart wrenching, but it's a very hard thing to deal with, to be thinking about being incapacitated permanently.
Mhm.
And getting little bits of life back, quality of life back, is huge when you are this sick.
Yeah, you start to notice those little wins that might go unnoticed by a lot of people or taken for granted, but
Mm.
they really matter to patients like us.
And I'm not, you know, I'm not a Pollyanna about how I'll have issues probably the rest of my life. But like I said, when you get this sick, anything is anything is an improvement.
Absolutely. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for sharing your story. Really appreciate it.
No, thank you for being nice.